All right. Looks like Hangout is live, and we are finally finishing the Well-Grounded Rubiyist, which is the book that I have taken upon myself to present on a bi-weekly basis. So yeah, we'll see. And I just wanted to change something really quick just before I get started. Sometimes I don't notice typos until we're live. Cool. All right. All right. So yeah, we'll be going through chapters 12 through 15, which is completes the entire book. For those who don't know me, I have to tell people who I am since I don't do video for these. It makes it a lot easier just to kind of show my information on a slide rather than wave on a video. But before we start, I had some information I kind of want to go through. So we've been reviewing concepts for the book, not really going step by step through every single section. And for this section, it's more of the same, except the fact that this is more advanced than anything we've done actually in Ruby Newbies. So I actually only picked out certain things, not really explaining every single thing that was explained in the book, because the concepts we could probably spend forever talking about. So kind of just limiting it down. And also, just a note: there's a conference talk, because a lot of the ending of this book is actually called Metaprogramming, and it doesn't actually come out and say it, because I'm not sure if that's terms official, but there are books written on that. But there's a conference talk based on metaprogramming and why you should honestly, the talk actually pushes you away from metaprogramming and more of an object-oriented programming, but it's good to know both sides. So I thought I would give that recommendation here before I jumped into it. Yeah, so we'll just move on to Chapter 12, which Chapter 12 is all about file in the I/O class. I guess I think Horvath, did you go through the Odin project, the Ruby videos at all? Because we did have a week that we did go over file and I/O and stuff like that.
No, I missed it.
Okay, well, it might be a repeat it was a repeat for me, but it kind of went more depth. But I did not go really in depth in my notes on this section, just because the next section is a little more beefier in topic content. So, but basically, file and I/O. It's just file is actually a class of I/O. A subclass of I/O. It inherits a lot of its functionalities, but I/O is just a way of talking to other files. Similar to how string, you could run different methods on strings. I/O and files, you can run different methods in files, and just as you would think they would be, is how they work. So I didn't really feel like I needed to reiterate what was in the book, because if you think a file that open, that will obviously open a file, and then file that read reads the file. Just certain little things like that. I have some examples here. They do have a standard input and a standard output, which is also some other subclasses of that I/O class. But in a nutshell, they all operate just as arrays. So if you had a piece of paper with words written on it, those words could be also under the enumerable class. So when you do .each, can actually be used on files, and they're actually used just like arrays. So you can actually do next if you want to do file that next line. I think it is. I didn't write specifically that. Sorry, one sec. Sorry, I just felt like a sneeze was coming on, so I thought I'd take a break. I was slightly sick this week, so I'm kind of recovering from that. So I might sneeze, but I might not. Just FYI, I'm not sure if I can get to the mute button quick enough. So, but yeah, that's it. I mean, I didn't feel like we really needed to spend too much time on this, and there's this other slide I have about reading from files. So, file.new, you have the file ticket2.rb, and just as you would think, f.read, which is f is the variable of file.new in that file, which takes that argument. You can also throw in another argument if you wanted to create a file. If you want to make it readable and writable, it's all in the section. But just good stuff to know if you ever do. I did throw in a little note that I have used these concepts twice, and the whole time I've been learning Ruby, and both times were both in exercises. So I've never actually used this for a work basis or for in a real life situation, but I do know people do use this regularly. I know in Python they use it quite a bit to do scripts and working with a lot of the back-end programming, not the web-based stuff. But I've never used it, so I don't have any extra like experiences I could add to these slides. But just FYI, if you ever need to use it, you know it's possible. And it's easy enough just to pull up the Ruby documentation and read how to use files in the IO class. So with that being said, I'll just move on to chapter 15, which is object individualization. This was interesting because I've seen this before, but I've actually so a lot of these next 3 chapters are a lot of things that I've never actually used in practice, but I've seen in practice, or I have used, but not really knowing the exact use case or the proper use case rather. So actually, yeah. So for one, the singleton methods in classes. This is pretty cool because actually, if you remember back when we were talking about scope and self, having methods nested within the class means that you can call that class. So if you have the class .dog, you can call dog.bark and with the method of bark, and it will return that object. But with class, you could actually call methods on objects. So similar to how we had, actually we don't have it. So if I had an object here, I guess the example is not really descriptive, but this object is basically a variable. You could pass that variable into a class, just like so, and then call methods under it. So if I had a variable where I had my cell phone number or my mobile number, and I wanted to do something to that number that's outside whatever you can do with strings, I want to create a specific number to return my phone number twice, which is one of the examples, then I could do object, put into a use the little inheritance operator into class and write a method called twice, so that way I can do object dot twice and it will return my number twice. But again, there's a way to do it without doing object individualization or singleton methods. But this is kind of a cool way if you needed something quicker. But again, it's not. I'm not sure if this is commonly used or known, but yeah, I mean, I guess it's a good skill to have in your back pocket, or I guess a good knowledge to have in your back pocket in case the time comes that you need to use it. So yep, and again, the second example is this creating an object, whatever, the class is C and C.new, and now you can add class methods into that actual object, which is C. So I guess if I had a class called Brian and it was a separate from the person class who it probably inherits from, I guess I could do specific things to just the Brian class that I didn't want to have affect the person class. And if you look below that second example, it's got the ancestors, and it shows you that it starts with the C class object, but the next ancestor is actually the module, because the module includes, and then again it goes back to the C class, and then object and kernel and basic class. So module gets put before the C class rather than the other way around, like normal. And that's it about class methods and singleton methods and singleton classes. They're just little one-off things that you could do, just a quick rerouting of things. Again, this is some stuff I haven't really had much practice with. Ironically, I actually just started working on a file that has this in the file. It's a module within our Rails app at work, and I saw it, but I've seen the syntax so many times that I didn't really make note of it. But now I kind of understand it. Though I kind of understood what was happening before, I have a better understanding now. Something else that I kind of ran into this week, which coincidentally it was actually part of the reading, was aliasing, where you could actually change the name of the method. So if you had a method that you used throughout your entire application, which maybe it's cut the rope, and for a specific class you wanted to change the name to be more focused on what that class is. If you wanted to do cut the rope rather than maybe call it snip the rope or fold the rope, you could actually change the name just by using the alias method before it. So the old reverse will now become the new reverse. And it's yeah, I actually spent some time reading the Ruby documentation only to find out I didn't need to use it for what I was trying to do. But yeah, that's some good stuff. So now we're getting into a little more of the deeper things within Ruby. Ruby is a very dynamic language and has a lot of, well, obviously there's cool things you can do in it. For one being procs and lambdas. Now, I guess I've had this question a lot, and I've even asked the question myself, what the difference between a proc and a lambda is. And I was just in a talk not on Thursday where I actually presented, but the presentation that came after mine was about 10 things in Rails or Ruby that they found to be helpful or annoying, because the person actually came from a PHP background. And one of the things he had mentioned was procs and lambdas, that how he loves using them, but he didn't really know the difference. But there's a Stack Overflow answer out there describing the differences, I guess in a nutshell, and the difference being using a return inside a lambda returns the value of that lambda, but using a return in a proc returns from the enclosing block. So procs actually don't have a specific return for them. It returns what's in the block, though a lambda will return if you explicitly call return, you will get an error. Now, what that means in your code, I don't know. But I guess it's good to know eventually if I ever get to that point. Again, I'm fairly new to Ruby, so I haven't had the opportunity to do anything besides write. I think I've written one Lambda out of 10 months that I've been doing this, and I've written a lot more procs than I have Lambda. So just my use case, I've just used procs more. Not really sure what to do with Lambdas or how to distinguish it. I think I used my Lambda because it was recommended. Oh, well, that's not true. The Lambda I used actually was due to with time, which actually I will get into the next section. Yeah, there's another slide later. I'll talk more about that. But just know that there's a proc and there's a lambda, and you're able to use that. The symbol to proc method, the symbol for converting things to proc is the ampersand. If you see a .map in the open parentheses, and then there's an ampersand, that's something pretty cool to use. So basically, rather than writing .map and then call a variable, which could be x, and then take x and capitalize x and then return x, you can simplify that by actually presenting that proc, which is capitalized with the capitalized call on it. So if you ever see ampersands, those are actually procs. And again, I didn't know if I explained it well enough. Hopefully the book did. But procs and lambdas are movable blocks that you can take with you. So you can actually save the instance of a block and rerun it in another spot. So sometimes you could have some complicated code to be run that you could actually transfer over to somewhere else easily. For example, capitalizing David and Black. I don't know. Did you kind of understand procs and lambdas when you got to this point, Corvac?
Yeah. Yeah, I got it, but actually I never used any of that.
Yeah.
It was, I don't know. I can't really understand them. I mean, I know what they are good for, but I I don't know them how they work in practice.
Well, if you think of it as with practical object-oriented programming, which is another book been reading,
Hmm.
the recommendation is to keep your methods under 5 lines. So if you're writing a block and you're doing all this work within the block, and it's looking like 10 lines of code, a good example to use a proc would be there because you can actually save that proc and make it into its own object by calling proc.new, and then calling the yield method, which we kind of learned about briefly, and you can yield a block so that way you can just
Hmm.
call that block later on. So it's a better way of abstracting your code, so that way you're not having huge blocks of code one after the other. You can actually abstract that proc to be used again. So, for example, that capitalize, that's something you'll probably use again in your code somewhere else. If you're capitalizing everything and you're repeating your code, which again, it's don't repeat yourself, keep being dry. You're
Hmm.
able to save that capitalized method and rerun it using the ampersand and the colon um, on your object. So if that makes sense, it's just basically another way for you to keep dry and not repeat yourself over and over again. I guess that's the best way I can explain it,
Uh-huh.
and that's kind of my use case I've been using.
Yeah, I get it.
Another cool thing about procs, uh, I guess, man, my slides are looking really weird on here, but it looks fine in the presentation view, so I'll just go with that. But another cool thing about procs is, again, it's just like taking that code and saving it to be reused once again. Um, actually, was I on the? Oh, I have a blank. Was I showing a blank slide the whole time?
Yeah.
Oh, that's weird because I deleted it. Hold on.
I thought we see the same.
All right. Sorry, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Cool. Yeah, it looks like I just need to refresh the slides because it looks like it was just showing some dead slides that I had deleted.
Yeah, I think there was only one empty slide.
Was there?
I I thought we are seeing the same, so I didn't mention it. It was the
Okay.
seventh. Yeah.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
let's
all.
go through that. Yeah, because it's deleted my presentation.
Hmm.
All right, so this is my explanation I was talking about earlier, calling proc.new. Um, and you can actually repeat that code, which is this will print using a .call method. You don't have to use .call; you actually just instantiate the proc. And the ampersand, that's what I was talking about with capitalize. So you could actually use that ampersand repeatedly. It doesn't have to just be capitalized. If I had a method inside my proc.new, which was print the string, I could do ampersand print the string method, and I can repeat that code. So that way I'm not repeating the same block over and over again, but I'm repeating that object. So yeah, and then my next slide, which is this controlling a proc. Um, so you have the method make counter and return. So I'm returning the proc, which is that block, which is n plus equals 1. What's cool about this is you can actually call that specific instance of the proc for each time you want to use it. So rather than running a block, and normally a block you'll just run n plus equals 1 until it ends, or also an infinitely loop. Procs, you can actually call it specifically that one time. So that's another thing about procs, which what I was getting at with lambdas. Lambdas are slightly different. They have a return object, which From my understanding, the one time I've ever used a Lambda was with time, and Lambdas actually do better with time if you're using a block and you want to calculate time. A Lambda will give you that specific instance. There's a lot of problems with Rails and Ruby if you don't use the right time calculation. For example, the recommendation use time.current rather than time.now, because time.current will take into account time zones and daylight savings time. So yeah, that's more information that's in the book, but just to kind of help understand lambdas and procs, it's that actual block you're calling that specific instance. So you actually, rather than, so you start with 0, you actually have to hit c.call to get 1, and then c.call to get 2. And if I created a new object, which is the new usenet method make counter, and I do d.call, it starts with 1. But I can continue on with c.call and do 3. And I put a little note. It's like lightning in a bottle. You could capture that code and be able to reuse it over and over again. I guess that's what I got from the book, and that's my best way of explaining it. I would actually be really interested in doing an entire presentation on blocks and lambdas, just because I want to know more about them. So I think that might be a goal of mine to maybe do a talk. Part of my plan for the Ruby newbies is not just to do books and not just to go through curriculum, but to do more of a set schedule, like a type of a meetup for people who don't have meetups locally. So that we can just do an online meetup and we just meet for the hour online and talk about stuff. So that is my goal. So stuff like that, talking about procs and lambdas, I think I might put a talk together and do something like that for Ruby newbies, as well as summarize some books and curriculums and stuff like that would be great. So now we have a Lambda. Lambda, it's you could use this. It's called a stabby operator with the hyphen and the greater than symbol. But again, they operate just like procs. And if you do Lambda class, you can see that they fall under the proc class. So they're very similar. Yeah, it's kind of like not really. I was gonna say it's kind of like strings and hashes, but it really isn't. Strings and hashes do have a lot of similar methods that you can call in them, but they're still quite different. I think procs and lambdas are a lot closer than strings and hashes are. But other than that, yeah, I think one of my to-dos is probably to write talks on procs and lambdas. That would be a good idea. Cool. So the next section, actually the next 2 sections towards the end of the book, actually we kind of hinted around it in this section about callable and runnable objects, but this whole last chapter is all about metaprogramming, and metaprogramming is very interesting. It's so it's the title or the comment that I heard was metaprogramming is writing bugs in your codes with beneficial side effects. So you basically you work around the established code in the framework by writing your own enhancements to the code. So the problem with that is when other people go to your code and look at it, you have to explain to that person how it works and how to read your code every time. So it just makes it a little more interesting, to say the least. I personally, looks like I changed the slide. I just had to fix a typo. Am I back there? Okay, yeah. So yeah, metaprogramming. I personally have avoided metaprogramming myself, just because I've been focusing more on the core constructs of Ruby and trying to learn that better, rather than learn more about adjusting the Ruby syntax and the code and how methods are working. So I actually haven't used much metaprogramming personally. I have come across it in my day-to-day at work, but yeah, I highly recommend if you're. My personal opinion is if you're just learning Ruby, and you're coming from no other actual background, probably shy away from metaprogramming. But if you are coming from another language where you have Java experience, um, by all means, go for it. But the recommendation is to write your code in a way that people can actually read it if they were coming to it. Or if you come back to your code in 6 months, you want to be able to read what your code's doing easily. So that's my recommendation. So a lot of the stuff that comes up next, I kind of breeze by. I don't really give too much thought to it, just because adjusting the evals and Ruby classes, it's something it's cool to do, but it's also complicated and not always recommended to do. So I just saw a job posting for a company locally, and they recommended that you know metaprogramming, so I'm quite interested in knowing what they actually do day to day. It's a newer company in the area, so I'm not really sure what they do. But yeah, I don't know a reason why you would need to do metaprogramming unless you do something pretty substantial with your code. So yeah, with that being said, I did not do much stuff on the slides. I kind of did a little callback and mentioned them in the slide, and that's about it. So, for one thing, one of the biggest things is method missing. That is one acceptable thing in metaprogramming that people use. But for example, like method missing will help reroute your errors. So if you want instead of the error coming back and saying you have a method missing, obviously they want you to you can actually have different code run. So I guess it's basically error handling, but without getting too much more depth that the book didn't do. I'll just leave it at that. There's other things that you can do is change the inheritances, enable overrides. Yeah, it's just a lot of stuff that you can abstract the simplicity of Ruby out of. But with that being said, there are a lot of powerful and popular gems and applications that are built using these tools. So it's it's good to know what they are, so that way you know what you're looking at if you do come across it. But yeah, it's very very common to see this in the gym if you actually go through the source code. But with that being said, I did have one more quote that I got. When you learn how to use a hammer, everything begins to look like a nail. So that's why I've tried not to learn too much metaprogramming, because I don't want to purposely throw that in there and then have to explain my code repeatedly to new people who have to read it. So it's exciting to learn metaprogramming. Actually, I was pretty excited months ago when I first started reading the book, but I was approached by a developer that was pretty experienced and actually recommended me not to go down that path, but rather learn the basics of Ruby first and really understand how Ruby works before I go change it. So, yeah, but that's my soapbox. Yeah, I highly recommend to read through that and learn it, but don't go try using it every single time, or else you'll just be using the hammer to beat stuff down. So in Microtest, that was just another little quick section at the end. I thought it was pretty cool because it actually shows you how Minitest is built. But other than that, it's here's one example of how metaprogramming is used to build something useful. The testing framework is built using metaprogramming. Highly useful if you wanted to build out your own testing framework, or if you wanted to really understand how testing works. I don't think you need to know how it's built to know how to test, but it's pretty cool, I guess, to look into. I thought it was cool. But yeah, that is it. That's my conclusion. I think that might be a repeat of what I had before, but yeah, Ruby makes sense logically, and if reading this book, and it helps understand Ruby and its capabilities, and even more so if you look into how it's built. So this is my idea for the next book, which will actually be refactoring Ruby. My idea is to kind of do, since we've gone through a beginner's book, maybe get into an intermediate book, which refactoring Ruby will be. It kind of helps with the best practices. I've been throwing around a couple books. Also, the Practical Object-Oriented Programming book, Practical Object-Oriented Design in Ruby, is another book I might switch out with this book, but I have to go and read that through. It might actually might be a quicker read than this one. But I guess just stay in touch on Twitter and on Google Plus, and I guess it'll make it easier to. Actually, I'll go back to my slide. Yep, there we go. Yeah, so yeah, keep in touch. I will be posting updates on what the final decision of the book. I'm aiming more towards a refactoring Ruby, but also I understand that practical object-oriented design might be even more important to know how to write it proper. Might be easier than refactoring it. So I might, just talking myself out of it, I might just do that book. But other than that, that's the end of this book. I am definitely pleased that I was able to get through it, and that some people will be able to watching it. I guess I've been doing a lot of odd times, but a lot of people have been reaching out and giving feedback about the Ruby Newbies and just I guess my journey in general. So that's been cool. But hopefully we can get more of a set time. My goal is to pick a time and a day, and rather than meet bi-weekly, probably meet monthly at that same time, but then have like random meetings in between, but at least have one consistent time, so that way people can be able to participate. So with that being said, I'll go ahead and end the video there, and please be on the lookout for the next video series.